Hello ladies and gentlemen. This is my first video of me giving my thoughts on a point-and-click adventure game. This one being about Chronicle of Innsmouth, since that's the adventure game I had just finished recently. I don't want to call this a review per se. I'm not even going to rate the game in any way. I'm just going to say what I liked about the game, what could have been done better, and whether I think the game is worth your time. And even though I go with the assumption that you have watched mine, or someone else's let's play of the game, or you have played it yourself, I try to avoid story and puzzle spoilers. So, Chronicle of Innsmouth was developed and published by a small Italian indie team called Psychodev last year, 2017. And, as far as I know, this is their very first game. As the title may have given it away, the story of the game is loosely based on H.P. Lovecraft's story, The Shadow over Innsmouth. And yes, it's Innsmouth, not Innsmouth. So if you have read the story, or you are at least familiar with it, you should pretty much know what to expect. In Chronicle of Innsmouth, you play as a young guy celebrating his coming of age, as he puts it, with a tour of New England, and is trying to get to Arkham from Newburyport, but he must go through the ill-famed fishing town of Innsmouth by bus. And once you get to Innsmouth, you start to learn the horrifying truth and story behind the town. The game never gave us the main character's name, so I just called him Guybrush because he looks like Guybrush Threepwood from the Monkey Island games. When we are talking about the game's graphics, it's obvious that the art style and the user interface with the 9 different commands and the inventory were inspired by LucasArts adventure games from the early 90s, most notably The Secret of Monkey Island. While Chronicle of Innsmouth's pixel art doesn't look nearly as good as The Secret of Monkey Island's, it's good enough as far as I'm concerned. Some areas look better than others. Although the close-up looks of the characters look about as good as what I could do with paint. Back to environments. I especially like how the town of Innsmouth itself was portrayed. Dark, wet, dirty, misty, no bright colors, it rains most of the time, the townsfolk are very unfriendly and unhelpful, minding their own business, and they don't quite look or sound human. Very fitting atmosphere. It looks and sounds like Innsmouth should, in my opinion. The music is also fitting with its eerie soundtrack, although the soundtrack as a whole is not that memorable. And some areas just rely on the sounds of the environment, which works too. When Chronicle of Innsmouth first came out, the game had no voice acting. But later they released a deluxe edition of the game with voice acting, as well as localization to Spanish, which is the version that I played, but in English of course. The third language option being Italian. The voice acting is okay at best for the most part. All I can say for the voice actors' credit is that they get the job done. And at least I don't need to try to read and keep up with the dialogue text, which is always a big plus. And I think you can turn off the voice acting too if you want. Only one character's voice acting really stood out as a good and convincing performance. The horrified captive, he was either a priest or a missionary of some kind, whom you rescue as the investigator Long Carter. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that in a couple occasions you get to play as Long Carter, was it 10 years or so in the past? But about 70-80% of the time you play as Guybrush. The worst voice acting performance came from Zadok, the town drunk. Zadok, in case you don't know the original story of Shadow of Innsmouth, is supposed to be a sad old man and resident of Innsmouth with a tragic past who drinks his sorrows and memories away all the time. But here, he sounds like any other drunken fool and didn't even sound like an old man to me. The puzzles are decent and sensible. No moon logic puzzles you couldn't possibly solve yourself without a guide. I can't really come up with any puzzle design flaws. Well, maybe the fact that most puzzles were rather simple and straightforward with very little imagination used could be considered as one. Perhaps my favorite puzzle was that one where you had to make this weird light contraption, and then you had to mimic the lighthouse keeper's light signals. That was rather fun. A bit frustrating too, admittedly, but the idea was fun. So that was perhaps the most memorable and fun puzzle in this game, in my opinion. But one flaw in the game I can name that can get you stuck in the game is spotting the hotslights feature, which helps you find all the interactable spots in the game by showing eye icons on the hotspots when you press spacebar, saving you from pixel hunting. Except that it doesn't always seem reliable. The eye icons sometimes appearing in places where you can't go or interact with in any way. And at least once I noticed that they didn't appear on an interactable and very important thing in the game, which is why I didn't at first even notice it, and so I was stuck for a while, until someone commented about it. But that was a minor inconvenience at worst in the long run. Despite the game being inspired by old LucasArts adventure games, you can die in Chronicle of Innsmouth. But the game is very forgiving in the sense that the game autosaves itself automatically the moment you enter to a location where you can die if you make a wrong move. It even shows the blinking autosaving icon on the top left corner each time. I like this autosaving feature since it prevents you from losing lots of progress just because you forgot to save yourself. However, what I would have preferred is that the game didn't show you that it's autosaving, because every time it does, I know that I'm in a danger zone, and that takes away the surprise of getting killed and thus some of the tension. Speaking about dying, the death scenes in the game are surprisingly brutal. I was actually shocked how bloody and gruesome the deaths were. And I didn't even see the most grotesque one in my playthrough, and one of the viewers mentioned in the comment section. Made me regret for not failing at that one point with the investigator. Then at the end game we got some quick time events where you have to do something specific real quick or else you die. At first you may be confused what you have to do and thus may die a couple of times, but you'll get them very soon. At least I did. Although during my playthrough I did get stuck to this one part where I had to escape my hotel room as someone was trying to bargain, and I died over a dozen times. That was very frustrating. But the reason I died all the time was because I screwed up and missed one tiny but important step. Not because the QuickTime event itself was flawed, so I take the blame for my frustrating experience of that event. I beat the game in about 7 hours on my blind playthrough. I didn't read any guides at any point, but I did get some help like hints and suggestions from my viewers on a couple occasions when I was stuck. I would estimate that if I didn't get stuck for long periods of time at any point, I could have been in the game in somewhere between 5 to 6 hours. So it's a rather short game in the end, which is what I was expecting, honestly. But I still couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed how the game wasn't at least a bit longer. I just wanted a little more. But what wasn't disappointing was the ending itself. I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but let's just say that it was very creepy and not so happy kind of ending. Very fitting Lovecraftian ending if you ask me. I would recommend Chronicle of Innsmouth to any Lovecraft fan and for those who prefer these more old school point-and-click adventure games. I'm just happy that this game exists, because we don't have many video games, or at least good ones, that are based on Lovecraft stories or Cthulhu mythos in general, so getting to play something as good and faithful to the source material as Chronicle of Innsmouth is truly a treat. Psychodev team has made a very good adventure game, especially considering how this is their first title, and I really hope that they continue making more adventure games like these, whether they are Lovecraft themed or not. And I'm happy to tell you that they are actually working on the sequel called Chronicle of Innsmouth, Mountains of Madness, which of course is a reference to another H.P. Lovecraft story with the same name, Mountains of Madness. And judging from the early screenshots of the game, it's graphically a big improvement. It's still pixel art, but more detailed. I can provide you a link to a short article where you can check out the screenshots of the game. Of course I'll start playing that as soon as possible whenever it comes out. I'm really pleased to see that Lovecraft is getting more love in the video game scene, especially this and next year with games like Call of Cthulhu, the official video game from Cyanide Studios, and 2 Kickstarter games, Gibbo's Cthulhu Adventure and Stygian Reign of the Old Ones. So, those were my thoughts on Chronicle of Innsmouth. What are your thoughts on the game? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.